It was a peaceful evening in the Maplewood neighborhood. The sun was low in the sky, making everything glow with a golden light. Kids were playing in their yards, laughing as the leaves gently rustled in the breeze. Lila, a black woman in her late 20s, sat in her cozy living room, feeling excited. She was going to have her first baby, and every little kick made her happy. Today was a special day because she had a doctor's appointment to check on her baby, and she couldn't wait to hear the heartbeat. As Lila was getting ready, her phone buzzed. It was a message from her brother, Ethan Grant. "Hey sis, can't wait to meet my little niece or nephew. Good luck at the appointment." His kind words made Lila smile. She texted back, "Thanks, Ethan Grant," feeling warm inside. She picked up her bag and water bottle, then walked outside, breathing in the fresh air. The sun felt nice on her skin, and she loved how the neighborhood looked in the evening light. Lila got into her car, adjusted her seat, and started driving to the clinic. The streets were busy, but she felt calm, thinking about her baby. But when she turned onto Main Street, something changed. She saw flashing blue and red lights in her mirror. Her heart sank. "Oh, no, not now," she whispered. She wasn't speeding, but she knew police could be unpredictable. She pulled over, her hands getting sweaty. "Just stay calm," she told herself. A police officer, a white man named Officer Hayes, walked toward her car. He looked serious and a little scary. "License and registration," he said sharply without even saying hello. Lila felt nervous. "Yes, officer, just a moment," she replied, trying to find her papers. "I'm on my way to a doctor's appointment," she explained, hoping it would help. Yeah, just hurry up," Hayes said, sounding impatient. Lila's hands shook as she handed him her license and registration. "I'm sorry if I did something wrong," she said, trying to stay calm. Hayes glanced at her papers and then looked at her with a mean expression. "You people always think you can do whatever you want," he said rudely. Lila's eyes widened. "What do you mean by you people?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Just get out of the car," he demanded, ignoring her question. Lila felt scared. "Please, I'm pregnant and I haven't done anything wrong," she pleaded. "I just want to get to my appointment." But Hayes didn't care. "Out now," he yelled, his hand reaching toward his belt. Lila's heart raced as she slowly opened the car door and stepped out. She felt exposed and vulnerable. "What's going on?" she asked, confused and afraid. Hayes stepped closer, towering over her. "You think you can just ignore the law? No, Lila started to explain, but he cut her off and pushed her hard against the car. Lila gasped, trying to catch her breath. "You're going to learn some respect today," Hayes growled angrily. "Please, I'm pregnant," Lila cried, tears filling her eyes. But Hayes wasn't listening. "You think you can play the victim," he said, shoving her again. Lila stumbled and felt pain shoot through her body. People on the street began to notice. Some stopped to watch, unsure of what to do. "This isn't right," a man in the crowd called out. "Someone should help her," another woman shouted. "Leave her alone. She's pregnant." Lila looked at the growing crowd and felt a tiny bit of hope. Maybe she wasn't alone after all. "You can't treat me like this," Layla yelled, her voice shaking but strong. Hayes looked surprised by her words, but instead of stopping, he moved closer, his face twisted with anger. "You're just another black woman who thinks she can get away with anything." Lila's heart sank. This wasn't just about a traffic stop. It was about the unfair way people treated her because of her skin color. The crowd grew louder, supporting Lila. "Let her go," they shouted. But Hayes didn't back down. "You're all a bunch of troublemakers," he yelled, trying to hold on to control. Lila knew she had to stand up for herself. "You don't get to treat me like this because I'm black," she shouted. The crowd cheered and Lila felt stronger. They were on her side, and their voices gave her courage. Just then, a loud siren filled the air. Another police car was coming, and Hayes suddenly looked nervous. He realized he was losing control. The new police officer got out of the car and walked over. "Back off, Hayes." "What's going on here?" he asked, looking serious. Hayes stepped back, his face pale. He knew he had gone too far. Lila turned to the new officer, her heart still racing. Please, I didn't do anything wrong. I'm just trying to get to my doctor's appointment. The new officer nodded. Let her go, Hayes, he said firmly. You're in the wrong. The crowd cheered even louder. Lila took a deep breath, feeling hope fill her. She had stood up for herself, and maybe, just maybe, people were listening. Hayes stepped back, angry but defeated. Lila knew the fight wasn't over. There was still a long way to go to end unfair treatment. But in that moment, she felt powerful, ready to face whatever came next. The next morning, the sun rose over the town, bringing a new day. But Lila was still unconscious in the hospital, and her family waited anxiously for news about her and her baby. Ethan Grant and Dylan Hart were sitting quietly in a small room, holding hands to help each other feel strong. The air felt heavy, and the ticking clock seemed louder than usual. Ethan Grant looked at Dylan Hart, his face full of worry. I can't believe this happened. She was just going to the doctor, Ethan Grant said. I know, Dylan Hart replied, his voice shaky. The officer shouldn't have done that. We need to tell everyone what he did. Outside the room, friends and community members were arriving to support Lila's family. They whispered to each other, their faces showing worry and anger. News about the shooting had spread quickly, and people were coming together to fight for what was right. A nurse stepped into the waiting room, looking serious. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I need to speak to Lila's family, she said. Everyone turned to look at her. Is she okay? Ethan Grant asked, his heart racing. The nurse took a deep breath. She's stable now, but it's too early to know if there will be any long-term effects. She's still unconscious, but her family can go in and see her for a few minutes. Ethan Grant felt some relief, but was still very scared. Thank you, he said, and the nurse led them down the hallway. As they got closer to Lila's room, Ethan Grant's heart pounded. He worried, what if she doesn't wake up? What if she can't hear us? Dylan Hart put a comforting hand on Ethan Grant's shoulder. She's strong. We'll be here for her. She has to know we're fighting for her. When they entered the room, Lila was lying still on the hospital bed with machines beeping softly around her. Her face was bruised and pale, and she had an oxygen mask on. Ethan Grant's heart hurt seeing her like that. He gently took her hand. Lila, it's me, Ethan Grant. We're here, he said softly. Dylan Hart stood at the foot of the bed with tears in his eyes. Please wake up, Lila. We need you. Ethan Grant squeezed her hand tightly, hoping she could feel him. We love you. You're going to be okay. Just keep fighting. Suddenly, a reporter came into the room, holding a notebook. Excuse me, can I ask you some questions about what happened? Not now, Dylan Hart shouted, his face red with anger. My fiancée is fighting for her life, and you want to ask questions? The reporter stepped back, looking sorry. I didn't mean to intrude. As they stayed by Lila's side, Ethan Grant looked at the door, still worried. What's going to happen next? We need to do something about that officer. I'll handle it, Dylan Hart said firmly. We need to make sure he doesn't get away with this. After a few hours, a doctor came into the room. His face was serious. I'm Dr. Reynolds. I wanted to give you an update on Lila's condition. Everyone listened closely, their hearts racing. She's stable, but the next 48 hours are really important, the doctor said. Will she wake up? Ethan Grant asked, his voice shaking. It's hard to say, Dr. Reynolds replied, but you can keep talking to her. Hearing loved ones can sometimes help. After the doctor left, Ethan Grant and Dylan Hart took turns talking to Lila, telling her stories and sharing memories. They talked about the baby, their future plans, Ziak, and how much they loved her. Days passed slowly, and more people from the community came together to support Lila and her family. Protests started, with people demanding justice for Lila and others who had been hurt by the police. The news covered the story, showing the community's anger and their calls for change. In the town square, people held signs that said "Justice for Leela" and "Stop Police Violence." Ethan Grant and Dylan Hart knew they had to be part of it. "We need to go," Ethan Grant said one evening. "Lila would want us to be there." The next day, they joined the crowd, holding a sign that said, "Justice for Lila." Their voices joined with others, shouting for change. "We won't let this happen again," one woman yelled. "No more violence against our community." As they marched, Ethan Grant felt stronger. They weren't just victims anymore. They were fighting back. That evening, they went back to the hospital feeling both tired and full of hope. When they walked into Lila's room, Ethan Grant felt a spark of hope. "We did something today, Lila," he said. "The community is standing up for you." Dylan Hart nodded, standing close to Lila's side. "You're not alone in this fight." Suddenly, Lila's fingers twitched. Ethan Grant's heart raced. "Lila? Can you hear us?" Slowly, Lila opened her eyes. She blinked, looking confused. "Ethan Grant?" she whispered, her voice weak. "Yes, I'm here," he cried, feeling so much emotion. "You're going to be okay." "What happened?" Lila asked, her eyes wide with fear. "You were shot, but you're safe now," Dylan Hart said, tears of relief in his eyes. "We're right here with you." Lila looked scared. Is the baby okay?" "The baby is fine," Ethan Grant reassured her. "You're both going to be okay. Just take it easy." Lila closed her eyes again, tears falling down her cheeks. "I'm scared," she said quietly. Ethan Grant squeezed her hand. "You're strong, Lila. We're all fighting for you." As the days passed, Lila slowly got stronger. Her family told her about the protests and how the community was supporting her. One morning, a nurse came into the room with a smile. "Good news. You'll start physical therapy soon," she said. Lila felt determined. "I want to get better. I need to fight back." As Lila recovered, she watched the news about the protests. She felt so grateful to everyone standing up for her. In the hospital's common area, she saw her story on TV, and tears filled her eyes as she saw the signs and heard the chants calling for justice. "Lila, you're an inspiration," one nurse said, smiling. "So many people are supporting you." "I didn't ask for this," Leela replied, her voice shaky, "but I won't let them forget what happened to me." As she grew stronger, Lila started to plan. "I want to speak out," she told Ethan Grant and Dylan Hart. "I want people to hear my voice." Ethan Grant smiled proudly. "We'll help you. Your story is important." Weeks went by, and Lila became a symbol of strength. The community continued to fight, not just for her, but for everyone who had been hurt by police violence. Every day, Lila felt stronger and more determined. She wouldn't let her story be forgotten. She was ready to stand up and demand justice for everyone. When the day of the big rally came, Lila was nervous but excited. She stood in front of the microphone, ready to speak. The crowd cheered for her, and she felt their love and support. With her family by her side, Lila took a deep breath. She was ready to fight for justice and make her voice heard. Together, they would make the world a better place, one voice at a time. As they talked, a doctor walked over, looking very serious. "Can I speak to you?" he asked, signaling them to step aside. Ethan Grant's heart started beating fast as they followed the doctor into a small room. "Is she okay?" he asked, his voice full of worry. The doctor took a deep breath. "Lila is stable now, but she got hurt very badly. We're doing everything we can, but it's serious." Dylan Hart felt a lump in his throat. "What does that mean for the baby?" he whispered softly. "The baby is fine for now, but we have to keep a close eye on both of them," the doctor explained. "It's very important that Lila stays calm and doesn't get stressed, but I can't promise everything will be okay." Ethan Grant felt tears coming to his eyes. "No, no, no," he whispered. "She has to be okay. She's strong. She'll pull through." The doctor nodded, but his face showed that he wasn't sure. "You need to be ready for anything," he said. "It's just a waiting game now." As they walked back to the waiting room, Ethan Grant felt a wave of anger rush through him. "We can't just sit here and do nothing," he said, his fists tightening. "What do you mean?" Dylan Hart asked, his eyebrows scrunched up. We have to let people know what happened. We can't let them forget that Lila was shot, Ethan Grant explained. Dylan Hart agreed. You're right. We have to make sure everyone knows that Officer Hayes shot her for no reason. He can't get away with this. Together, they started planning. They decided to organize a rally, a gathering where people from the community could come together and ask for justice for Lila. They wanted everyone to know about the problems with the police that led to Lila getting hurt. The next day, news reporters crowded the hospital. Ethan Grant and Dylan Hart went home to prepare. They printed flyers, made pages on social media, and asked their friends to help. The flyers said, "Join us for a rally to support Lila and ask for justice." As the day of the rally got closer, Ethan Grant felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. He knew they were fighting something big, but they couldn't just stay silent. Finally, the day of the rally came. The air was full of energy as people gathered in the town square. They held up banners and signs that said, "Justice for Lila" and "Stop Police Brutality." Ethan Grant and Dylan Hart stood at the front of the crowd, feeling proud of the work they had done to organize the event. "Thank you all for coming today," Ethan Grant shouted into the microphone. "We're here to honor Lila and ask for justice for her. No one should be shot just for driving a car." The crowd cheered loudly, their voices blending together as they chanted, "Justice for Lila." As the rally continued, other people spoke about their own experiences with unfair treatment from the police. Each story made the crowd more determined to fight for change. "I'm here because I believe in making things better," one woman said, her voice strong. "We need to make sure the people in charge are held responsible for what they do." Ethan Grant and Dylan Hart looked at each other with pride as they listened to the stories. They knew this was more than just a rally. It was a movement that could change their community. As the sun began to set, the crowd lit candles to honor Lila. The flickering flames lit up their faces as they stood together, united in their call for justice. "We will make a difference together," Dylan Hart shouted, his voice full of passion. "Lila's story matters, and we will make sure people hear it." The crowd clapped and cheered, their voices full of hope and strength. Ethan Grant felt a rush of hope as he looked around. They were all standing together, ready to keep fighting for change. Later that night, as Ethan Grant and Dylan Hart drove home, they talked about how the rally had gone. "We did it, man," Ethan Grant said, feeling excited. "We got people's attention. We made our voices heard." Dylan Hart smiled, but he also looked a little worried. "But what do we do next?" he asked. "We need to keep pushing for justice." Ethan Grant nodded. "You're right. This is just the beginning. We'll keep fighting for Lila and for everyone who has been hurt like this." Little did they know, their fight was far from over. As the sun set, their community stood united, ready to face the challenges ahead in their quest for justice for Lila. In the days after the incident, emotions were mixed. Lila lay in the hospital, slowly getting better, but her spirit stayed strong. Meanwhile, the community outside was busy, rallying for justice and calling for Officer Hayes to be held accountable. People were angry about what had happened to Lila and were determined to make sure her story was heard. As news of the shooting spread, Lila's brother, Ethan, Grant, a burning need to act. He knew that Lila would want them to fight for change, not just for her, but for everyone who had been treated unfairly. With a heavy heart, he gathered his friends and family to talk about how they could raise awareness about police violence against Black people. "We need to organize a rally," Ethan said one evening, as he sat around a table with Dylan Hart, Lila's fiancé, and a few other friends. "We can't just wait for justice. We need to make our voices heard." Dylan nodded, his face a mix of anger and determination. "You're right. This isn't just about Lila. It's about everyone who has been treated unfairly. We have to show the police and the world that we won't stand for this." Everyone agreed, and they started planning. They made flyers, posted on social media, and asked local organizations to help. They wanted this rally to be big so the city would see how many people cared about justice for Lila and others like her. As the day of the rally got closer, the excitement in the community grew. Ethan felt hopeful, knowing that they were all coming together for an important cause, but he also felt the weight of responsibility. Lila had always been the strong one, and now it was up to him to carry on her fight. On the morning of the rally, the sun was shining and there was excitement in the air. People began to gather in the town square, holding signs that said, "Justice for Lila" and "Stop police brutality." Ethan looked around, feeling a mix of pride and worry as he saw the faces of friends and strangers alike, all standing together for the same goal. As the crowd grew, Ethan took a deep breath. He climbed onto a stage they had set up and got ready to speak. "Thank you all for being here today," he shouted, his voice echoing across the square. "We're here to honor Lila and to ask for justice for her and for all the victims of police violence." The crowd cheered loudly, their voices full of support. "Justice for Lila! Justice for Lila!" they chanted, the sound filling Ethan's heart with strength. He raised his hands to quiet the crowd. "Lila is in the hospital right now, fighting for her life," he said. "She didn't deserve this. No one deserves to be treated like this because of the color of their skin." The crowd roared in agreement, their energy spreading to everyone present. As the rally continued, different speakers came forward to share their stories about police treating them unfairly. A young woman named Tasha stepped up next. "I'm here because I'm tired of being scared of the police," she said, her voice steady. "I've seen friends hurt just because they were black. We need to stand up and fight back." Ethan felt a wave of emotion as he listened. Tasha's words struck a chord with everyone in the crowd, and they cheered once again. This rally wasn't just a one-time event. It was a chance for the community to come together and push for change. As the rally went on, the crowd grew bigger, filling the square with voices demanding justice. They chanted, held up signs, and raised their fists in solidarity. Ethan felt powerful, knowing they were all united in this fight. Just then, the mood changed as someone familiar walked toward them. It was Lila's mom, holding a bunch of flowers. She moved through the crowd looking both sad and proud. Ethan quickly went to her, his heart hurting when he saw her tearful face. "Mom," he said softly, hugging her. "I'm so glad you came." "I couldn't stay away," she whispered, holding the flowers tightly. "Lila needs to know how much we love her." Ethan nodded, feeling how serious everything was. "We're fighting for her. We won't let her down." Together, they walked to the front of the rally where Lila's story would be shared. Ethan took a deep breath before speaking to the crowd. "Everyone, this is Lila's mom. She's the strongest person I know, and she's here to support us today." The crowd clapped loudly, showing respect for Lila's family. Ethan felt a wave of thankfulness for everyone's help. He looked back at his mom, who smiled at him with pride. "Lila is going to be okay," she said, her voice calm. "She's a fighter." The rally went on, with each speaker inspiring the crowd. Everyone knew they were making a difference and their voices were being heard. As the sun began to set, casting a warm light over the square, Ethan felt a little hope growing inside him. But when the rally ended, Ethan Grant also felt a bit of fear. What would happen next? Would they get justice for Lila? Would Officer Hayes be held responsible for what he did? These questions hung in the air, but Ethan Grant knew they couldn't give up. "Remember this day," Ethan Grant told the crowd as he ended the rally. "We're not just here for Lila, we're here for everyone who has been silenced and hurt. We will keep fighting until justice is served." The crowd cheered again, their voices showing how strong they were together. Ethan Grant felt a burst of energy, ready to face whatever challenges came next. Together, they would make sure Lila's story was heard and that justice would come. As the crowd left, Ethan Grant and Leela's mom stood together, filled with hope. They would keep fighting to make sure Leela's voice and the voices of others would not be ignored. They were determined to make a change, and they would stay strong together. Days passed after Lila was shot, and the hospital felt heavy with worry. The news of her being in serious condition spread quickly, making people in the community angry. Ethan Grant and Dylan Hart spent every day by her side, praying for her to get better. They felt like they needed to do more than just wait. One sunny afternoon, Ethan Grant was sitting in the waiting room, scrolling on his phone. He saw a video of a protest downtown. People were demanding justice for Lila and asking for Officer Hayes to be punished. His heart raced as he watched the passion and anger of the people in the video. This is what we need to do, he thought. We can't just sit here. He turned to Dylan Hart, who was sitting by Leela's side, looking worried. Dylan Hart, we need to join the protests. We have to make our voices heard, Ethan Grant said with urgency. Dylan Hart looked up, determination in his eyes. You're right. Lila wouldn't want us to just sit here while others fight for her. Let's do this. With a new sense of purpose, Ethan Grant and Dylan Hart sprang into action. They started reaching out to friends and family, spreading the word about the protest. They wanted to make sure everyone knew Lila's story. Meanwhile, nurses and doctors took care of Lila, updating Ethan Grant and Dylan Hart about her condition. One afternoon, a doctor approached them with a serious look on his face. Lila is stable, but she's still in critical condition. We need to watch her closely, the doctor explained. I know this is hard, but you need to prepare for the possibility of complications. Ethan Grant's heart sank. What do you mean? Complications? Her injuries were very bad. She is responding to treatment, but there's no guarantee she will fully recover, the doctor said gently. Dylan Hart clenched his fists, feeling angry. She's going to pull through. She's strong. The doctor nodded. I hope you're right, but we need to stay realistic. Let's focus on supporting her and making sure she gets the best care. As the doctor left, Ethan Grant and Dylan Hart exchanged determined looks. They knew they had to be Lila's voice. They couldn't let her story be forgotten. That night, they sat in the waiting room, thinking about ways to spread the word. What if we create a social media campaign? Ethan Grant suggested. We can share Lila's story and talk about the injustice surrounding her shooting. That's a great idea, Dylan Hart replied, his eyes lighting up. We can use hashtags to spread the word. Let's make sure everyone knows what happened. They spent hours making posts, sharing photos of Lila, and telling her story. They included information about the protest and encouraged people to join. They even reached out to local activists for support. Soon, their campaign took off. People shared Lila's story, and support poured in from friends, family, and even strangers. The hashtag Justice for Lila began trending in their community, bringing together people from all walks of life. As the day of the protest grew closer, excitement and nerves filled the air. Ethan Grant and Dylan Hart knew this wasn't just a protest. It was a way to honor Lila and demand justice. On the morning of the protest, the sun was shining brightly. Ethan Grant and Dylan Hart arrived at the meeting point, their hearts racing. The square was packed with people holding signs and chanting for justice. The energy was electric as they joined the crowd, ready to stand up for Lila. Justice for Lila, the crowd chanted, their voices echoing through the streets. Ethan Grant felt proud as he held his sign high, feeling the unity of the crowd around him. As they marched, they saw families, young people, and elders all standing together for the same cause. The diversity of the crowd showed how strong their community was. People shared their stories of discrimination and injustice, making it clear that change was needed. At the front of the march, a local activist gave a powerful speech about the need for police accountability. We can't let this be just another case that gets ignored. Lila deserves justice, and we will fight until she gets it. Cheers erupted from the crowd, echoing the determination in their hearts. Ethan Grant felt tears in his eyes. This was about more than just Lila. It was about everyone who had faced similar injustice. As they marched through the streets, Ethan Grant's phone buzzed with notifications. Their social media campaign was reaching far beyond what they had imagined. People from different cities were joining in, sharing Lila's story and encouraging their own communities to take action. The rally ended in front of the local government building, where speakers shared messages of hope and resilience. Ethan Grant took the microphone, his heart pounding. Thank you all for being here today. We're here for Lila, but we're also here for everyone who has suffered from police brutality. We won't stop until justice is served. The crowd erupted in applause, their voices blending into a powerful chorus. Justice for Lila, they chanted, their words filled with purpose. As the protest went on, a sense of hope filled the air. People shared their stories, connected with each other, and formed bonds that would carry their movement forward. They were no longer just individuals. They were a united group standing up against injustice. In the days that followed, the protest gained national attention. News outlets reported on the rally, showing the community's voices demanding change. Pressure grew on local officials and conversations about police reform began. Back at the hospital, Lila's condition started to improve. Ethan Grant and Dylan Hart continued to visit her, telling her about the protest and showing her the support they had gathered. They wanted her to know she was not alone in this fight. One afternoon, as they sat by her bedside, Lila opened her eyes. "What happened?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're in the hospital, Lila. You were shot. But the community is fighting for you," Ethan Grant said, his heart racing with excitement. Lila looked confused. "Fighting for me?" "Yes, we held a protest and people are rallying for justice," Dylan Hart explained, tears of joy in his eyes. "You have so much support, Lila." As Lila processed the news, a spark of determination appeared in her eyes. "We need to make sure he pays for what he did," she said, her voice growing stronger. Ethan Grant nodded eagerly. "We will, Lila. We promise to keep fighting until you get the justice you deserve." With that promise, they knew the battle was far from over, but together they had started a movement that would continue, ensuring that Lila's story would never be forgotten. The road ahead would be hard, but with the community behind them, they felt ready for anything. The sun rose on a new day, shining brightly over the city outside the hospital. A big crowd was gathering, their faces showing a mix of determination and hope. They held up signs that said, "Justice for Lila" and "Stop Police Violence." It was a group of family, friends, and strangers, all coming together for one purpose: to stand up for Lila and demand that someone be held responsible. Inside the hospital, Lila lay in bed, surrounded by the soft beeping sounds of machines. She had finally woken up, but the pain in her chest reminded her of the scary events that brought her there. As she looked around the room, she saw her brother, Ethan Grant, sitting beside her. He was holding her hand tightly. "Lila, you're awake," Ethan Grant said, his voice full of relief. "I was so worried about you." Lila smiled weakly, thankful that her brother was with her. "What happened?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. "You were shot by a police officer, but you're safe now. You're going to get better," Ethan Grant explained, his eyes filled with tears. "The whole community is standing up for you. Everyone is fighting for justice." Lila's heart filled with gratitude. "I need to fight back. I can't let him get away with this," she said, determination filling her voice. "You will," Ethan Grant promised. "We're going to make sure your story is heard." Outside the hospital, the crowd continued to grow. Activists, friends, and family held a press conference to demand justice for Lila. The energy in the air was powerful, and many people wanted to speak out. "This isn't just about Lila," one speaker said with passion. "This is about every Black person who has faced injustice from those who are supposed to protect us." The crowd cheered loudly, their voices blending together into one powerful sound. In her hospital room, Lila listened to the rallying cries of her supporters through the window. "They're fighting for me," she thought, feeling a surge of strength. "I can't let them down." As the days passed, the community organized more protests and vigils for Leela. Each event brought more and more people. The message was clear. They wouldn't be silent. They were standing against unfair treatment and demanding change. Lila's fiancé, Dylan Hart, joined Ethan Grant at the front of the protests, holding a sign that said, "Justice for Leela." His heart ached for Leela, the woman he loved, and he was determined to make sure her voice was heard. "Lila is a warrior," Dylan Hart said, speaking to the crowd. "She fought for her life, and now we will fight for her. We won't stop until justice is done." The crowd cheered back, their energy growing. Lila watched from her hospital bed, tears of pride streaming down her face. She felt their love and support wrapping around her like a warm blanket, filling her with strength. One evening, as the protests continued, Ethan Grant and Dylan Hart decided to go talk to the local officials about Lila's case. They knew they had to act and demand that someone be held responsible for what had happened. "Let's go to City Hall," Ethan Grant suggested. "We need to make sure our voices are heard." Dylan Hart nodded, determination shining in his eyes. "We need to show them that we won't back down." When they arrived at City Hall, they found a group of supporters gathered there too, demanding answers. The air was full of energy, and Ethan Grant felt a sense of purpose fill him. "We're here to speak for Lila," Ethan Grant shouted, catching the attention of the crowd. "We want justice for her and for everyone who has faced discrimination." The crowd cheered again, their voices echoing through the halls of City Hall. Inside, the local officials listened to the people's demands, feeling the pressure of their words. Ethan Grant and Dylan Hart stood at the front, urging the officials to take action against the police department and hold Officer Hayes responsible for what he did. "This isn't just about Lila," Dylan Hart said firmly. "This is about our whole community. We need to make sure no one else suffers like she did." The crowd continued to chant for justice, and the officials exchanged nervous glances. They knew they had to address the community's concerns, and they were feeling the pressure. Days turned into weeks, and Lila's recovery slowly progressed. With each passing day, she grew stronger, and so did her desire to fight for justice. She watched the protests from her hospital window, feeling inspired by the passion of the people outside. One day, a news crew arrived to cover the protests, and Lila decided it was time to tell her story. With Ethan Grant and Dylan Hart by her side, she sat down for an interview, ready to speak up about the injustice she had faced. "I want people to know what happened to me," Lila said, her voice strong and clear. "I was shot by a police officer for no reason. I didn't do anything wrong. I was just driving to my appointment." The reporter nodded, listening carefully. "What do you want to see happen next?" "I want accountability," Lila replied firmly. "I want Officer Hayes to face the consequences of his actions. We can't let this happen to anyone else. We need change." When the interview aired, Lila's words touched people across the country. Her bravery and determination sparked conversations about police violence and the need for reform. The protests grew even larger, and Lila became a symbol of the fight against injustice. At the hospital, Lila's family continued to cheer her on as she got stronger. "You're a true fighter," Ethan Grant told her, pride shining in his eyes. Lila smiled, feeling thankful for the love and support surrounding her. "I won't stop fighting. Not now. Not ever." As the pressure on local officials grew, they finally announced that Officer Hayes would be suspended while an investigation took place. The community cheered, knowing they had made progress, but they also knew the fight wasn't over yet. Lila's heart raced as she realized their voices had been heard. "This is just the beginning," she thought, determination filling her spirit. In the weeks that followed, the community continued to push for change. They organized town hall meetings where residents could share their stories and talk about how to create a safer community. Lila attended every meeting she could, sharing her story and listening to others who had faced the same unfair treatment. Together, they brainstormed ideas for building a community where everyone felt safe, respected, and valued. As the movement grew, Lila realized they weren't just fighting for her. They were fighting for a better future for everyone. "We're stronger together," she told the crowd at one meeting, her voice full of strength. The community rallied around her, their voices united in the fight for justice. "We will not be silent. We will not back down," they chanted, their passion sparking a fire inside Lila. As the investigation into Officer Hayes continued, Leela and her supporters stayed strong in their pursuit of justice. They knew change was possible, and they were ready to fight for it. Lila's strength and courage inspired everyone around her, and she felt so grateful for the love and support she received. She was determined to keep fighting, not just for herself, but for everyone who had been treated unfairly. As the sun set over the city, Leela sat by the window in her hospital room, looking out at the vibrant community she loved. She knew that together they would create a better world, a world where everyone felt safe, respected, and valued. The fight for justice was just beginning, and Lila was ready to face whatever came next. With her brother, her fiancé, and her community by her side, she felt unstoppable. The weeks after Lila's shooting felt like a roller coaster for her family and friends. They had fought hard for justice, and the community was still buzzing with anger and determination. Lila was starting to get her strength back, and the support from the community made her feel less alone. But the fight wasn't over, and everyone knew it. One sunny afternoon, Ethan Grant and Dylan Hart went to visit Lila at the hospital. The halls were decorated with colorful drawings made by local children, showing their love and support for Lila. As they turned the corner and walked into her room, they saw Lila sitting up in bed with a smile on her face. "Hey, you two," Lila said, her voice still a little weak but full of warmth. "Hey, superstar, how are you feeling today?" Ethan Grant asked as he pulled a chair closer to her bedside. "Much better, thanks. I'm ready to get out of here," Lila replied, determination shining in her eyes. Dylan Hart grinned. "You're looking strong, Lila. We're so proud of you. The community has been rallying behind you. It's amazing." Lila felt a wave of pride and gratitude. "I can't believe how many people care. It makes me want to fight even harder," she said, her voice growing stronger. Just then, a nurse came into the room with a clipboard in hand. "Lila, how are we doing today?" she asked cheerfully. "Feeling good. Ready to be discharged," Lila said with a smile. The nurse nodded. "That's great to hear. Just a few more tests and we'll see if we can get you home." Ethan Grant and Dylan Hart exchanged excited glances. They knew how much Lila wanted to get back to her normal life, especially with her baby on the way. As the nurse checked Lila's vitals, they talked about the rally they had planned for justice. "We're organizing everything for Saturday," Dylan Hart explained. "We want to make sure everyone knows your story and what happened to you." Lila nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "I want my voice to be heard. It's not just about me, it's about everyone who has faced this kind of violence. We need to change things." The nurse smiled as she finished her checks. "I admire your spirit, Lila. You're going to inspire a lot of people." After the nurse left, Lila turned to Ethan Grant and Dylan Hart, her expression serious. "We have to make sure people know that Officer Hayes can't just walk away from this. He needs to face the consequences." Ethan Grant agreed. "We're going to make sure everyone knows what he did. This is just the beginning." As Lila and her friends talked about their plans, Lila felt a burst of hope. She could imagine people at the rally holding signs, chanting for justice, and standing up against unfairness. Later that week, the whole neighborhood supported Lila. The news talked about her story, and people posted about the rally online. The hashtag Justice for Lila was very popular, and people from all over wanted to help her fight for fairness. On the day of the rally, the sun was shining brightly as people came to the town square. Families, friends, and even strangers came together for one reason: to support Lila. Colorful signs filled the air with words like "Stop Police Violence" and "Lila Deserves Justice." Ethan Grant, Dylan Hart, and Lila came together, Lila in a wheelchair. She smiled and waved at the crowd, and people cheered loudly. The whole square was filled with energy. "Thank you all for being here." Ethan Grant shouted into the microphone, his voice full of feeling. "We are here to stand up for Lila and demand justice for what happened to her." The crowd clapped and cheered, shouting, "Justice for Lila." Their voices were strong and their message was clear. Lila looked at all the people, feeling grateful but also responsible. She took the microphone, her heart beating fast, but she felt brave. "Thank you all for being here," she said. "I didn't just survive a terrible thing. I'm here to fight for everyone who has been treated unfairly. This isn't just my story, it's all of our stories." The crowd cheered even louder, clapping for Lila's bravery. As the rally went on, other speakers shared their stories of being treated unfairly and hurt by the police. Each story made the message stronger. Things needed to change. Lila listened carefully, feeling proud as people shared their experiences. She felt connected to them and knew their pain. "This is what we need," one speaker said. "We must come together and make sure the police are held responsible for their actions. We can't be scared to speak up." Lila felt even more determined. Their words gave her strength, and she knew they were making a difference. They wouldn't stop until things changed. As the sun began to set, covering the square in a warm glow, Lila spoke again. "We will not be quiet. We will keep fighting for justice until everyone feels safe and respected in our community." The crowd cheered loudly, shouting, "Justice for Lila! Justice for all!" After the rally, Lila and her family were tired but full of hope. They went home knowing they had made a difference that day, but they also knew the fight wasn't over. They had to keep working to make sure Officer Hayes faced the consequences for what he did. As they talked that night, they shared ideas on how to keep the fight going. Ethan Grant suggested that they talk to local groups that work on police reform. Dylan Hart thought about starting a petition to gather more support. Lila felt excited as they talked. "We need to reach as many people as we can," she said, her eyes shining with determination. "We won't stop until we get justice." As days passed, the pressure on the police department grew. The community stayed strong, standing behind Lila. News outlets talked about the protests, and the whole country was watching. As Lila's health improved, she felt more determined than ever to keep fighting. She knew she had to speak up for others who couldn't. One afternoon, while Lila was resting at home, Ethan Grant got a phone call. "You need to come to the police station," someone said. "They're making an announcement about Officer Hayes." Lila felt a rush of energy. This was the moment they had been waiting for. She and Dylan Hart quickly got ready, excitement and nervousness rushing through them as they hurried to the station. When they got there, a crowd was already gathered. Reporters with cameras were ready to capture the moment. Lila's heart raced as she joined the crowd. The police chief stepped up to the microphone and the crowd became quiet. "We are here today to talk about what happened with the shooting of Lila Grant," the chief began. "After looking into it, we have decided to suspend Officer Hayes without pay while we keep investigating." The crowd gasped, and Lila felt a mix of relief and frustration. "Is that it?" she whispered to Dylan Hart. "What about real consequences?" The chief continued, "We will also start new training programs to make sure officers handle things better." The crowd shouted in anger. "That's not enough," someone yelled. "He needs to be held accountable." Lila stepped forward, raising her voice. "This isn't just about training. she said. "It's about justice. Officer Hayes shot me for no reason, and he needs to face the consequences." The crowd cheered, backing her up. "Justice for Lila," they shouted. Lila felt a surge of determination. This was their chance to demand real change, and she wasn't going to stop. "I will not stop until justice is served," she said firmly. "We will keep standing up against police violence and unfairness until every person feels safe in their community." The crowd cheered, their voices giving Lila strength. She knew they wouldn't give up until real change happened. Together, they would keep fighting for justice, making sure Lila's story was heard loud and clear. As the sun set, Lila felt a new sense of hope. She was surrounded by people who cared, ready to stand together against unfairness. They wouldn't stop until everyone's voice was heard. Later, Lila, Ethan Grant, and Dylan Hart stood in front of the crowd at a press conference. Cameras flashed and reporters whispered, eager to hear every word. Lila felt nervous, but brave. This was their moment to share their story and demand justice. The mayor stepped up to speak. "We are here to talk about the terrible shooting of Lila Grant, a pregnant mother shot by Officer Hayes while driving home. This has deeply affected our community." Lila took a deep breath. She saw her mom in the crowd, proud tears in her eyes. "We promise that justice will be served," the mayor said. The crowd cheered loudly, chanting, "Justice for Lila." It was now Lila's turn to speak. She stepped up to the microphone. "Thank you for being here," she said. "I'm here to tell my story, not just for me, but for everyone who has been treated unfairly because of the color of their skin." Lila stood in front of a big crowd, and everyone was quiet, listening carefully to her. She took a deep breath and felt brave. "I was just driving to my doctor's appointment when Officer Hayes stopped me," she began. "He treated me like a bad person, and for no reason, he shot me. I want everyone to know that I didn't deserve this. No one does." The crowd gasped, and Lila could see they were getting upset. "This isn't just about me," she said, her heart racing. "It's about all the moms, dads, brothers, and sisters who have been hurt by the police. We need to stand together so this never happens again." The crowd clapped loudly, and Lila felt tears in her eyes. She had waited so long for this support. "I'm fighting for my baby and for all of us," she said firmly. "Officer Hayes needs to be punished for what he did." As Lila finished talking and stepped away from the microphone, her brother Ethan Grant hugged her tightly. "You did it, sis," he said, proud of her. The crowd cheered even louder, agreeing with her words. Then the mayor came to the front and spoke to the crowd. "We will look into this matter carefully. Officer Hayes will face criminal charges, and we will work to make the police act better in our community." "This is just the start of our fight for justice," Lila said, looking at her friend Dylan Hart, who smiled at her with admiration. "I can't believe we're actually doing this," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "Yeah, we are," Lila replied, her earlier nervousness fading into a smile. "And it's all because of everyone who's been with us." As the crowd began to leave, Lila, Ethan Grant, and Dylan Hart felt full of hope. They knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but they were ready for the challenges. In the days that followed, people in the community came together to help Lila. They made a support group and raised money to pay for her medical bills. The local community center also held events to talk about police violence and unfair treatment. One evening, while Lila was sitting in her living room, she got a call from a local news station. "We'd like to do a follow-up interview with you," the reporter said. "Your story has inspired so many people, and we want to share it with more people." Lila felt both excited and a little nervous. "I'd love to," she replied, her heart beating fast. "But I want to make sure we focus on the need for change and holding people responsible." "That's exactly what we're aiming for," the reporter said. "Your bravery has started a movement, and we want to help make it louder." As Lila got ready for the interview, she thought about everything that had happened. She remembered how scared she was during the shooting, the worry about getting better, and the amazing support she had received from the community. All these memories made her even more determined to make a difference. On the day of the interview, Lila sat in front of the camera, feeling her heart race. The reporter smiled kindly. "Thank you for being with us, Leela. Can you tell us about your journey since the incident?" Leela took a deep breath and spoke calmly. "It's been a long journey. After I was shot, I was terrified. I thought I might lose my baby, and I felt so helpless. But with the support of my family and the community, I found my strength. I realized I had to speak up, not just for myself, but for everyone who has gone through this kind of injustice." The reporter nodded, clearly touched by Leela's story. "What message would you like to share with others who might be going through similar experiences?" "I want them to know they're not alone," Leela said, her eyes shining with determination. "We need to support each other and stand up against injustice. We have the power to make things better, but it starts with us telling our stories and demanding justice." After the interview ended, Lila felt a wave of relief. She was proud of how far they had come, but she knew this was just the beginning. The community's support gave her hope, and she was ready to keep fighting for justice. As weeks turned into months, the investigation into Officer Hayes continued. The community stayed strong, organizing marches and candlelight vigils to keep attention on the issue. Lila, Ethan Grant, and Dylan Hart attended every event, their voices growing louder and more powerful with each one. One day, they gathered for a rally outside the police station. Lila stood in front of the crowd again. "We are here today to demand justice," she shouted, her voice clear and strong. "Officer Hayes shot me, but he will not silence us. We will fight for justice, and we will not give up." The crowd cheered, their voices filled with strength. "Justice for Lila, justice for all," they chanted, their words echoing through the streets. As the rally continued, Leela felt strong. She knew they were making a difference, and the community's support gave her even more hope. Together, they would build a better future for everyone. Finally, the day came when the district attorney announced that Officer Hayes would face trial for what he had done. The community waited for justice, hoping it would come. In the courtroom, Lila sat with Ethan Grant and Dylan Hart, her heart pounding as they waited for the decision. The room was silent, everyone holding their breath. When the verdict was announced, Lila's eyes filled with tears of relief. Officer Hayes was found guilty of using too much force, and he would go to prison. The crowd outside the courthouse erupted in cheers. Their voices were loud and filled with joy. Lila stood tall, her heart full of pride. "We did it!" she shouted, hugging her brother and Dylan Hart. "This is for all of us." The community had come together to make a change, and Lila knew their fight wasn't over yet. But in that moment, she felt hopeful and proud, knowing they had made a big difference. As they celebrated outside the courthouse, Lila realized that their story was just one of many. They had started something big, and their voices would continue to be heard. Together, they would keep fighting for justice, not just for themselves, but for everyone who had faced unfair treatment. In the days that followed, Lila became an advocate for change. She shared her story to inspire others and encourage them to stand up for their rights. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to face it with courage and determination. Lila had found her voice, and she wouldn't let it be silenced. With her family and community by her side, she would keep fighting for justice, one step at a time. If you enjoy the story, please share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. And if you liked the story, please subscribe to my channel, Piece of Fiction. I spend a lot of time writing these heartwarming and inspiring stories for you, and your support means a lot to me.